Good afternoon, everyone, and really welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining. Our webinar will cover accelerating decarbonization through the CO2 Performance Ladder, and we're going to focus on how an effective energy and CO2 management system can drive carbon emission reduction. My name is Capucine, and I work for Agendi, and we're very pleased to host this session together with Renewi. Before we dive into the topic, let's start with a quick overview of today's session and some introductions. Today's session is brought to you by Agendi and Renewi. On the Agendi side, we have Seppe Buys, a senior associate consultant, and myself, Capucine de Decker, a manager, and I'll pass it on to Simon to introduce the Renewi team.
Yes, thanks, Capucine. Hello, everyone. My name's Simon. I'm a sustainability lead at Renewi for several years now, mainly driving the whole sustainability strategy within that the decarbonization and energy-related topics. Today, we're also here with Anna. I'll let you present yourself, Anna. And thank you, Agendi, also, by the way, for the invitation once more.
Yes, thank you everyone for being here. I'm Anna. I'm a management trainee at Renewi since September 2024. And the past year, I led the recertification process for the CO2 Performance Ladder of Level 4 Handbook 3.1 for Renewi.
Thank you. Looking now at the agenda for today, we'll start with a short welcome and context to tell you a bit more about Agendi and Renewi. Then we'll jump into what is the CO2 Performance Ladder, and then Renewi will be able to share some insights on their goals and opportunities related to the CO2 Performance Ladder process. And finally, we'll close with some key takeaways and Q&A. Couple of housekeeping points. This session is being recorded, and in terms of Q&A, we'll be tackling your questions at the end, but please submit your questions throughout via the chat, and we'll tackle them at the end. With that, let's start by setting the context and introducing Agendi and Renewi. Agendi itself is a sustainability consulting firm, and we provide services to corporate organizations. We support them through knowledge and capacity building, helping them understand their impact, supporting strategic planning, enabling action, and assisting in reporting and disclosures. Some of our core work includes greenhouse gas calculations, ESG materiality assessments, defining net zero strategies, and of course, the CO2 Performance Ladder reporting support. Our goal is to help organizations move from ambition to implementation in a structured and impactful way. And I'll now let Simon introduce Renewi.
Yes, in short, Renewi is the leading waste-to-product company in the Belgium and Netherlands. We actually have a role in the circular economy that really comes from the whole collection of waste to the sorting into qualitative materials and also processing where relevant. We work with all kinds of waste streams except nuclear waste, so very broad spectrum of organic waste, construction and demolition, residual waste, etc. And we are doing this by trying and being partially leader in the recycling industry. We also want to be leader in the secondary materials production, so really being able to transform waste into secondary raw materials, and that also by selectively growing our market share. So, of course, we have a strong sustainability mindset and strategy underpinning this whole objective. So we want to be a circular economy change maker by stimulating collaborations with partners throughout the value chain. We want to do this by reducing our carbon emissions the best we can and the most we can. And of course, by caring for our people and ecosystems. So just to add, we are at a level of about 6.5 million tons of materials that are brought back into the circular economy per year, to give you a scale. So that's in short. We have about 140 sites, quite some almost biggest fleet from the Belgium and Netherlands combined. So quite a big player in the sector, let's say.
Thank you. We'll come back to Renewi shortly. First, let's take a step back and introduce the CO2 Performance Ladder. So the CO2 Performance Ladder, to give you a bit of history when looking back in time, has been around actually for 15 years and is increasingly being adopted in Europe. It was developed in the Netherlands and is now managed by the SKO. In Belgium, it's actually BNOR that is managing its deployment. Today, we have around 8,000 organizations that are certified, with a majority of SMEs, which is quite similar to the ecosystem of companies in Belgium. When it comes to Belgian certified companies specifically, there is about 300 of them to date, and we have more than 300 buyers actively using it. The CO2 Performance Ladder itself is really serving as a CO2 performance management tool, but also a mechanism for sustainable procurement. And we'll deep dive into that in a minute. The CO2 Performance Ladder was introduced in Belgium in 2019 and recently went through a handbook update, which we'll also cover into more details. But so the first handbook 3.1 was out in 2020, and in 2025, the handbook 4.0 was published. So what does this mean specifically for organizations, and why is it gaining traction? The CO2 performance delivers several tangible benefits to corporates. The first one is, of course, that it allows for structural reduction of emissions and energy use. It lowers your energy costs, offers stronger market positioning, and finally also gives you a competitive advantage in public tenders. Most importantly, version 4.0 of the handbook is now aligned with international standards such as the CSRD, SBTi, and the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which has also helped its adoption from companies. To understand how it actually works a bit more into details, Seppo will take you through the underlying structure.
Thanks, Capucine. Let me now walk you through how the CO2 Performance Ladder actually works and why it's more than just a reporting tool. At its core, the ladder is a certified management system. Think of it like, for instance, the ISO 14001, but purpose-built for CO2 and for energy. It's structured around a PDCA cycle, plan, do, check, act, a logic that will feel familiar to you if you already work with quality or environmental management systems. The cycle covers 4 concrete areas, as indicated on the slides. Starting with assessment, this explains the understanding of your carbon footprint across scope 1 and 2, and where relevant, also scope 3. Second step being reduction, translating that insight into action plans with measurable targets. The third one is collaboration, which entails engaging suppliers, subcontractors, and other partners in the value chain. And lastly, communication, reporting transparently to buyers, clients, and other stakeholders that are deemed relevant. Specifically for real estate and construction companies, this is directly relevant for your scope 3 emissions, for instance, as these are increasingly under scrutiny. And for transport and logistics, on the other hand, the scope 1 fleet emissions are often the starting points when starting with CO2 Performance Ladder, but fuel efficiency and route optimization connect directly to a reduction pillar. The key message here is that it's not a one-off exercise. It's about building a system that keeps improving year on year, which Renewi will dive into later on. On the next slide, I will dive into the 3 steps of ambition. The ladder is designed to meet organizations really where they are. You choose your level of ambition, and as indicated here, there are 3 levels or steps, as they're called, in the ladder. Starting with the first step, this is all about reducing within your own operations of your organization. It focuses on scope 1 and 2. So, for instance, energy consumption, direct emissions from your fleet or facilities, and has a short-term horizon of 1 to 3 years. For a construction company, this could mean, for instance, your machinery, your on-site energy use, and company vehicles. For a real estate owner, this could be related to the building's energy consumption or your heating systems that you would have to look into. Step 2, that's already a bit more ambitious. This is looking at reducing across your whole value chain. You start targeting emissions that are linked to your core activities. So also including the ones from your suppliers, subcontractors, and tenants. Here you develop a medium-term climate transition plan. So it's no longer very short-term, but already looks a bit more into the future. For example, for transport companies, this is where you would look into fleet electrification strategies and supplier fuel commitments that would come into play. For the construction sector, you could think about the procurement policies around low carbon materials and concrete. As a last step, we have the net zero by 2050 commitment. This is the most ambitious level. It requires a fully quantified transition plan, scope 3 coverage, but also a long-term strategy. This is also what we see that is increasingly expected by larger public buyers and institutional clients. But the biggest and most important point is that you don't have to start at this step. The ladder is truly a journey that you grow into and that you will refine, which is exactly what Renewi's story will illustrate shortly. Now let's talk a bit about the version 4 that Capucine already mentioned before. As you can see here, we moved from Handbook 3.1 to Handbook 4.0. This happened in 2025, and it's a significant update. Worth understanding if you're considering certification or whether you're already certified. It's a structural change. We went from 5 steps in the old handbook that were being consolidated into 3 more clear and more ambitious steps. So less complexity, but also higher bar. A new top step is added, as you can see in the light gray, as the highest ambition level, requiring a full quantified net zero commitment. But most importantly, the version 4 is now explicitly aligned with international standards. You're already likely working with, for instance, the CSRD, SBTI, or the GHG protocol, as Capucine indicated earlier. This is a big deal for your sector, especially if you're, for instance, in real estate or in construction, as these industries face CSRD obligations, and alignment means that you're not duplicating work, but that you're actually building on it, on the work that you've already done for CSRD. For transport companies, especially those serving public sector clients, version 4.0 makes the ladder even more credible as a tender differentiator. And the whole intent of this update really is to keep it accessible for SMEs and for large organizations alike, while making sure that it holds up against the latest regulatory and market expectations. As you might think, this new handbook is being launched. How will we all adapt? On the next slide, you see here a visual of the transition phase from the CO2 Performance Ladder. They gathered that they will give organizations some time to adapt. And for this reason, there is a 3-year transition period between the version 3.1 and the version 4.0. If you're currently certified under version 3.1, you don't switch overnight. You really have time to plan. This transition window is actually a strategic opportunity too. You can use it to assess where your current certification maps it to the new structure and decide what your next ambition level should be to move forward. Practically speaking, the question to ask is here, are we a step 1 organization today, and can we realistically move to step 2 within the transition window? This would, of course, be the best scenario. For companies in heavy public procurement sectors, once again, construction, infrastructure, transport maybe, getting ahead of this transition is commercially smart. Buyers are already starting to reference the version 4.0 requirements in tender criteria. So being ahead of this curve is, of course, the smartest thing to do. And this is, of course, also something we at Agendi actively help clients to navigate, where we map your current position and build a concrete roadmap to your target step. Agendi supports organizations across the full certification journey, tailored to your starting point and your ambition level on where you would like to go. If I walk you through our service offering, this is what it would look like in practice. Starting from the top, we have evaluation, where we start by mapping your current emissions across scope 1, 2, and 3, and assessing your energy footprint. For a transport company, that means your fleet data. For real estate, again, that's your building portfolio. We would identify gaps and define realistic ambitions. As a second step, we have the data collection. We can help you build a data quality management plan, so your inventory is audit ready and consistent year on year. At the third step, we would help you reduce. We would develop concrete action plans with measurable targets, and where needed, a full climate transition plan for the step 2 and 3 certifications that are part of the new version 4.0. Communication, which is of course always a nice thing to do. If you have done something nice, you also would like to communicate about it in the best way possible. So we would help you draft a communication plan so your sustainability story is credible, but also consistent internally and externally. Collaboration is the penultimate one. We identify where your value chain gaps are and how to engage with key suppliers and partners, which is very important to have a resilient value chain. And lastly, the internal audit. Before you go to your external auditor to get the certification for the CO2 Performance Ladder, we would or could review your full documentation package to make sure that you are prepared in the best way possible. So whether you're starting from scratch, building your first emissions baseline, or looking to step up from your current certification level, we can support you at every stage where you're at. And now, the best way to make this concrete is to hear from an organization that has actually lived this journey. So Anna, I will hand it over now to you to share Renewi's experience and yeah, help us understand it all a bit better.
Yes, thank you very much, Seppe. So I'll just quickly go over the process that we've been through as Renewi, implementing the CO2 Performance Ladder. So why we chose to adopt this as our CO2 and energy management framework, how we implemented it and what we ran into during this implementation, and then the results that we have achieved so far, and some recommendations for you if you're thinking of implementing this framework as well. So on the next slide, yeah, there's some drivers that led us to initially adopt the CO2 Performance Ladder. So we have been certified since 2019 and reached level 4 in the old handbook in 2022, and then extended our certification for both the Netherlands and Belgium in 2023. And we've noticed that there's two main external drivers that have really helped us get some buy-in from the entire company, not just the sustainability team, which is firstly the significant commercial value that is attached to this certificate. So in the Netherlands, we've seen an increasing demand for CO2 Performance Ladder certification in tenders, and then especially the public and semi-public ones. And over the past 1 or 2 years, we've also seen this growing in Belgium as CO2 Performance Ladder has internationalized. And besides this tangible value in tenders, the certificate also carries a reputational value, which has an indirect commercial benefit as well. And then a second external driver is that the CO2 Performance Ladder is considered an ISO 51 equivalent, as well as aligned with many different EU frameworks, and allows for exemptions in some cases for compliance requirements that we would otherwise have. And then internally, the CO2 Performance Ladder aligns very strongly with Renewi's own sustainability ambitions. So our ambitions to reduce CO2 emissions, to become more energy efficient, both within our own operations, but also throughout our value chain and within our sector. And the structured framework that is provided by the CO2 Performance Ladder has proven to be a very useful tool in supporting these ambitions. So let's take a look at the actual implementation. on the next slide. So let's start a bit high over. As Seppe and Capucine mentioned, the CO2 Performance Ladder is a management system, and as such, it of course affects many different parts of the organization, and it requires you to pass through a PDCA cycle each year, driving continuous improvement of your CO2 and energy performance. Now, Renewi already possessed some ISO certificates, meaning that we had management systems in place, which allowed us to integrate some of the CO2 Performance Ladder requirements into our existing processes. So think of our regular reporting and reviewing cycles, but also there where we could assign ownership for specific parts of the requirements using existing governance structures and steering cycles to kind of soften the load of the work and integrate this more into the day-to-day business. Now, this is, of course, something that needs to grow and mature over time. It's, I think, one of the challenges that we certainly ran into is getting this all nicely integrated, but investing in this early makes it far more sustainable to maintain this certificate in the long term. It keeps the workload manageable because you're not constantly duplicating your efforts or setting up entire separate processes, which obviously would take a lot of work. And this way, CO2 and energy management also becomes part of how the business operates from day to day, and really helps us to actually guide our decisions and support us in accelerating our decarbonisation ambitions. And yes, great, thank you. So as I mentioned, we are currently still certified under the old handbook at level 4, meaning that we're kind of floating between a level 2 and a level 3 in the new handbook. And as Seppe said, this is very much a developmental process of growing into the performance ladder. So it's not something that needs to happen overnight, and it's very much fit for purpose based on where your maturity as a company is. So for us currently, we have managed to get our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions quite clear. We have collaborated within the sector and within our value chain to look at those scope 3 emissions. And for us, the next step would be a commitment to net zero, which is certainly an ambition that we are working towards now. Yeah, can you go next slide? Great. Now onto a bit more of the practical stuff. So the certification process itself, this is just an overview of what our last certification process looked like in November 2025. So each year you will have to go through an audit for the CO2 Performance Ladder to make sure that your CO2 and energy management system is effective and functioning. And this consists of a couple different steps. So first, you need to share a portfolio with all your documentation of your insights, your reporting, your communications with the auditor. And this includes both the functional requirements, but also the requirements for continuous improvement. So your internal audit, your management reviews. Now we usually choose to schedule the internal audit not too far before the actual audit, kind of to give us a bit of like a nice way to assess our progress from last year, to prepare us for the audit and to see where we stand, and also for input into our management review. And then once the documentation is shared with the auditors, they will review it, and then you will have, depending on the size of your organization, a number of audit days, the first of which is usually to very much review the paper trail, so the documentation that you've submitted, and the second and maybe third and fourth to also go to operational sites or facilities and see how the implementation of this in your day-to-day operations on the shop floor is actually working. And then after the audits, you have, of course, some time to correct any major or minor non-compliances. And I think my biggest advice here is for us, getting the whole portfolio together in such a large organization can take a lot of work, as we need to get a lot of stakeholders involved. So depending on how mature your organization is and how large your organization is, it's good to take sufficient time to get that all together. And then for the next slide, this is just a bit of a sneak peek into what the first day of audits usually looks like for us. So this is where our documentation is reviewed. And I think it's important to note that the certification is not just about having the right documentation in place, but it's about verifying whether the system is actually working the way in practice that it is intended. So this is mostly done through interviews with people that are involved with parts of the certificate, but this includes top management as well, just to see how CO2 and energy is carried within the organization, and to also verify that everyone is aware of their responsibilities. And the auditors are generally kind of looking for both a trickle down from upper management, but also a bottom up process. So, of course, the hard requirements in the handbook would say you need to have group level targets and you need to have improved performance. But those are really only considered meaningful if they're supported by a clear strategy and a clear action plan, and if they're reached through collaboration throughout the entire organization. So for us, that means a lot of collaboration in different departments of the business to bring together an action plan that considers every single little thing and that gives us a very clear strategy to then base our targets on. And then the next audit day are more about then validating how this strategy is also translated into daily practice. So for us, we have a lot of different sites where we have a lot of different processes happening. So the auditors will generally let us know beforehand what sites they would like to visit. And then over the course of these days, they will speak with our site managers, our operators, any other site personnel to verify whether CO2 and energy management is carried within those parts of the organization as well. So they would, for instance, ask about energy monitoring systems, the implementation of energy efficiency measures, and just kind of get a feel for how these topics are discussed on the sites. And I think really important here is that the CO2 Performance Ladder becomes more than an administrative system, but rather kind of an alive thing that requires involvement across the entire organization. So from the boardroom to the shop floor, being able to showcase that people are involved in this process and are invested in the results and the performance of your company is very much what the auditors are looking for. Then on the next slide, you can see what it has brought us over the past few years. So of course, the real value is that the CO2 Performance Ladder is a driver in decarbonisation efforts. So what we've seen over the past years as we've grown into our level 4 certification is that we've gotten far better insight into our emissions and where we can influence and impact these emissions as well, which really helps us in making our roadmaps. We've also seen a stronger link between our strategy and our operations. So kind of the drive from the CO2 Performance Ladder to make sure that the whole organization is engaged and involved really helps with translating targets into concrete actions that are picked up by the business. And same goes for communication efforts and collaboration efforts, how they all trickle down and how it becomes very much a organization-wide initiative rather than just something that is done by a sustainability team. And on top of that, we also see that the awareness within the organization is increasing, and this is for us also still growing, and we have been certified for quite some time, but each year new people get involved, and we find new ways to drive improvement further. But these three main things have really helped us to move from ambition to execution and make our sustainability efforts more structured and easier to steer, which I think is eventually the main goal of the CO2 Performance Ladder. So then to close off, some challenges and recommendations. So I think I've mentioned a couple of these as well already, but from our experience, the biggest challenge, especially in larger organizations, is to make sure that all parts of the business that need to contribute are aligned. So as I mentioned, a lot of collaboration is required to make action plans and to come up with strategies, and getting everyone engaged and ensuring that everyone is aware of what is expected of them and what they should contribute is quite difficult and can take, I think, several certification cycles to really have it fully clear. So this is something that is really important to start with from the very first year and to just build upon over time. Then a second recommendation would be to make sure the CO2 Performance Ladder fits your company rather than the other way around. So there are some quite detailed requirements within the handbook, but the CO2 Performance Ladder does allow a certain degree of freedom as well in how to kind of adapt the requirements to your organization and make it so that it's valuable for your company in its day-to-day operations, rather than just becoming a yearly thing of having to make up all these documents to then get through the audit. So I think that's a great lesson that we've also learned a lot over the past few years. And I think directly attached to that is to also make sure that the processes that are required are embedded within existing processes, so that CO2 and energy management exists within the business and not next to it. So linking it to operational decision making and reporting practices, just so that it's part of your organization and how it runs day to day. And then lastly, the CO2 Performance Ladder, of course, can offer a lot of great advantages commercially, compliance related, but eventually the main driver should be to help you in your decarbonisation efforts. So gaining insights and using those insights to steer and to drive improvements and to help the business move forward and structure your decarbonisation efforts. So I think those are our biggest takeaways from being certified for quite some time now.
Thank you so much, Anna. I'll now walk you through some key takeaways before opening it to questions. So based on what we saw from the theory and the recent changes shared by Seppe, and also the concrete insights from an actual implementation at Renewi, I think the few takeaways that we can keep in mind are first that the CO2 Performance Ladder, and we won't repeat it enough, is not just a certification. It's really a powerful management system that drives real emissions reduction. The second point would be that it provides a structural approach with evolving regulations and best practice standards. So hopefully that really will streamline the process for companies to adopt the certification. Third, success depends really on embedding it within your existing processes. It's not standalone exercise that needs to be done in silo. It's really something that impacts your whole company. And finally, the real value comes from using it to connect your strategy, your operations, your decision-making across the organization. So really leverage that in that way. Without taking much longer, I think we can open it to questions. So we'll invite you to share them in the chat if you have not already. And I'll be sharing them to our panelists. Looking at the chat, we have maybe a first question for you, Seppe. A person is asking how different the transition plan is from the CSRD reporting. Could you tell us a bit more on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's also a question we get a lot, especially from companies that are already dealing with CSRD. The climate transition plan under CSRD essentially is a disclosure requirement. So you document your strategy, targets, and planned actions, and you report on those. But there's actually no one checking really whether you're doing it in practice. There is no external auditor visiting your sites, no annual verification whether the management system is functioning, and so forth. The CO2 Performance Ladder adds exactly that layer. It's a certified management system, so an independent auditor does come to your site, as Renewi was explaining. And it's not just what is written in your plan, but whether the CO2 and energy management system is genuinely embedded in your organization and how it operates. So the way I would frame it is that CSRD asks, what is your plan? And then the CO2 Performance Ladder verifies, are you actually doing it? The good news is that they're both complementary and not competing. So if you've already done your CSRD transition plan work, you've already had a great head start, especially under the version 4.0, which was explicitly designed to align with CSRD. Your scope 1 to 3 inventory, your reduction targets, and your transition plan, all of these things feed directly into the ladder. So you're not really starting from zero. The ladder adds accountability, structure, and also a commercial signal that your CSRD report alone, what your CSRD report alone doesn't give you. And this is then again particularly relevant in public tenders when they're required.
Thank you, Seppe. Maybe a question for you, Anna, since you spoke about it briefly when starting your presentation on the implementation at Renewi. One of our attendees is asking how different are the updated requirements in ISO 14101, which now also has climate requirements, monitoring, etc. How could you make a parallel with the CO2 Performance Ladder requirements?
Yeah, I think in some ways they are quite similar, also in the way that it's structured around the PDCA cycle and continuous improvement. I think the main difference lies in that ISO 14001 is very much still an environmental management system. So it's looking at your emissions, but it's not necessarily looking at your entire sustainability strategy, the way that you collaborate within your value chain and communicate about your efforts. And this is something that is, I think, very important within the CO2 Performance Ladder, and rightfully so, because it also requires you to communicate with your partners and drive improvement throughout your sector and your value chain by having these discussions and by having these conversations and by working together and innovating. So I think that is a big added value compared to the ISO norm.
Thank you. And if I can also ask another question to the Renewi team, there was also a participant asking why would someone want to obtain a certification, and what are the actors that are likely to ask for it? So could you share some maybe concrete examples on how you've used the CO2 Performance Ladder in different ways to your advantage, and has it opened any doors in terms of businesses opportunities?
Yeah, I can maybe answer that one. So I think what's interesting is that, of course, we said that in public tenders, it's very much being used more and more in Belgium also. But what we also see is that a bit like CSRD, the expectation from companies that also use CO2 Performance Ladder want to work with companies that also follow the same kind of framework. So you see that in a broader context, and for us, it's a lot in how we collect the waste, but also how we treat the waste and have an energy and carbon emission reduction plan. It's really expected from those either very public tenders or companies that already use it. And if I may add, we also had a meeting a bit more than a month ago at Renewi, which is the Recycling and Waste Federation in Belgium. And we see that it's really becoming, maybe the norm is a bit pushy, but it's really becoming something that's well known, that people know suppliers, customers will expect to be used. And I also just wanted to add on that is that there's a big use of the specific emission factors within the CO₂ Performance Ladder to use the emissiefactoren.nl. You also have .be, and that is actually helping companies to come into a level playing field that's quite interesting for all of them. So you see that because of that, the ball is starting to roll, and more companies are also using similar emission factors, which makes them more comparable in tendering, in offers. And so that's also in a way helping us to really be compared with a level playing field comparison emission factor. And that's also sounds maybe like a little thing, but I think it's really necessary, and we really saw that need within the recycling sector to have comparability between results. So that's also a big element.
All right. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Anna, for your answers, and thank you, Seppo, as well. For sake of time, I think I'll just to close this webinar, and any questions that you might have that you haven't had a chance to ask, please don't hesitate to send them via email. We've put 2 email addresses for Agendi and Renewi here on this slide, so we'll be reachable and we'd be happy to continue the conversation. I want to thank you again, Simon and Anna, for joining us today. And of course, to all of you that joined us for this webinar. We hope that it gave you practical insights on how the CO₂ Performance Ladder can support your decarbonization journey. We'll be sharing the slides and the recording with you shortly in the coming days, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you, and have a great day.